Steve Bannon joined Donald Trump's campaign for president in August 2016. But Bannon had been pushing the populist cause several years before President Trump became its face and force for change. Bannon served as President Trump's chief strategist until August of 2017, when he fell out of favor, if you want to say it that way. But Bannon continues to advise members of the administration, and his populist cause continues to gain momentum worldwide. Steve Bannon joins us now, and I have to start with the obvious question about the midterms, but I want to read a quote that you made not too long ago. This is all about an up or down vote, the entire Trump package, the tax cut, the economy. So very simply, what did the voters tell Donald Trump, the Republicans, and the Democrats?
I think it was a split decision. Look, I think it's, people talk about the division in the country. I thought 18 was very positive. I thought the left and the progressives, the Time's Up movement, Tom Steyer, I think they did the hard work out in the field that the Tea Party did in 2010. I kept telling people that early on. I don't think we ever actually got engaged on the House side to make it a referendum. I think it's one of the reasons we lost so many House seats. I think if we had made it a referendum, I think it would have been much tighter. By the way, I think it's 12 or 13 seats changed hands with 47,000 votes. So it was tight, but I got to tell you, the left and the progressive left, the Time's Up movement, the resistance, Tom Steyer's movement, did the hard pick and shovel work that the Tea Party did in 2010, and that's why they won. Are
you secretly happy or upset because you've had a war against Republican establishment? Mitch McConnell's still sitting in the Senate.
Yeah. No, look, we made a rapprochement early on to say everybody's got to come together. Remember, in 2016, one of the first things I did was reach out to Reince Priebus and the establishment. The only way we won 16, you have to have a coalition, right? You have to kind of put your differences aside to win. You saw that on the left this time. I mean, there's a broad range of differences on the left, and they put them aside, I think, to win this time. Here, after the Kavanaugh hearings, I was saying good things about Mitch McConnell. We just didn't pull it off. I do believe there wasn't enough focus on the House. I kept saying for months and months and months. I went on Hannity with 100 days to go, said the House is everything. But one thing I would tell you, when I first left the White House and met with the senior guys that were overseeing the campaign in the House. At that time, they were thinking 80 to 100 seats. They thought at one time
it would be a much bigger wave.
That this could be like the Tea Party 63 seats in 2010. And so, look, 31, 33, 35 seats, it's a big number.
And very quickly after the midterms, Jeff Sessions is out. He is a friend of yours. Yeah. What can you tell us about the transitions we might see within the cabinet? There's rumors that Kirstjen Nielsen will be out. Who else might change in the cabinet? And what about Whitaker? Is there a conflict of interest there?
Well, look, I met Whitaker when he came in and talked to us in the summer of 2017, right? And he went over as chief of staff to Senator Sessions, or Attorney General Sessions, and I think Senator Sessions was very happy with the job he did as Attorney General. Look, Jeff Sessions is one of the founders of this kind of populist movement, right? I mean, he's been doing this for a long time. He was the very first guy to endorse President Trump.
But you had to recruit him to do that. You literally had to bring him in to do that.
Well, I introduced him and made sure he got to know President Trump. He came to that decision on his own. He spent a lot of time. I don't think he did it. I think he did it right before Super Tuesday. He really spent his time with that. I think when you look at Senator Sessions and what he did as Attorney General on executing on the basic program with immigration, law and order at the Justice Department, I think it's fine, but the president gets to choose whether you got his confidence or not. I think in certain areas, Senator Sessions didn't. I think there are other cabinet positions that just don't have his confidence. And I think it's natural after a midterm election that you make some changes. So I think there's definitely going to be some changes. I think there'll be some changes in the White House also.
Will Whitaker mess with Mueller, or do you think that we're going to see conclusion? Will we see it before December?
I've been saying this for a long time. I think Mueller has this. I've always said he's going to issue a report sometime in late November or in December, and then it's a political process. Now that you have a Democratic House, I think that they will use that as to go forward to have in panel a select committee. I think they will really drill down on it. If we had held the House, they would not. But look, the investigation's been the investigation. I said from day one, if you get a special counsel, they're going to have a broad writ that they're going to determine what they've got and go forward. But when I hear people like, Jerry Corsi is for perjury, you kind of got to wonder. Where's the big issues that they started taking?
You brought it up. Roger Stone, what's going to happen with him? Is he spending Thanksgiving with his family?
Well, no, I have no idea. But my point on that is that if that's what you're talking about with Roger Stone and Julian Assange, I mean, how serious is this? This was supposed to look at Russian collusion. They're in a lot of stuff. I think the biggest focus has been obstruction of justice. My point is
26 Russians have been indicted.
I understand that. But look, Clapper in his book says it's 100,000 Facebook ads up in the upper Midwest. Look, Mueller's had enough time. He's had enough budget. He's obviously doing a report right now. He'll issue that report, and the American people will have to decide.
Right. I want to ask you this. What is your relationship with the president? Because he said when you were fired, Steve Bannon has nothing to do with me or my presidency. When he was fired, he not only lost his job, he lost his mind. You talk to the president these days?
Look, I do everything. If I got to talk to anybody, I do everything through lawyers, except there's guys at the White House I know. I think if you look at what the president's policies are, they're absolutely what we laid out in the campaign. It's what we've been talking about for years. When he said the other day he was a nationalist, I think really went forward and embraced this kind of economic, civic nationalism that is I think, one of the big driving forces in American politics. He showed that I think every action he's taken, particularly on the economy and about securing our southern border, is something I think people in this populist movement couldn't be happier with. And by the way, I come from a large Irish Catholic family. I get called a lot worse than that by my brothers at the dinner table.
Well, Anthony Scaramucci was dropping the president's name the other day. It says he talks to the president from time to time. You don't just pick up the phone. The president doesn't pick up the phone and talk to you?
I don't want to talk about my conversations with the president.
But you have conversations with the president.
I don't want to talk about that.
All right,
when I left the White House, I left the White House.
Okay, but you also...
I'm an independent actor.
You have conversations with Peter Navarro and with Josh Bolton, don't you?
I don't want to talk about who at the White House I have the conversations with. But I talk to people at the White House.
Do you have influence over the policy direction?
No, absolutely not. I think, look, this is one thing. If you go back and look what the president's accomplished, particularly on the economy and particularly on things like sovereignty about our southern border, and if you look at what he's done in this kind of great economic war with China, he's got very well thought through ideas. And I think that's why he's now got a staff of people like Bolton, people like Navarro, others that are helping to formulate and to sharpen these things. This whole idea, remember, when President Trump won, two things everybody said: he's going to be so trigger happy, he's going to get us in shooting wars all over the place. And number two, the market's going to collapse, right? I think maybe even Yahoo Finance with CNBC and others. Wall Street.
It was Krugman who said it in the New York Times.
New York Times, Wall Street Journal, people were, their heads were blown up. And you've seen what he's done with calming the markets, the strong U.S. dollar, the economy. So what many people said both about his national security policy and as a leader, as commander-in-chief, and no one's been more prudent than President Trump about the application of American power. And I also think on the economy and economic security. So in both regards, kind of not just the mainstream media, but this hysteria about what Trump is going to be is wrong. That's what you see in the White House. I mean, these are very strong beliefs of the president that he's now articulating through policy. And I think that's why he's got a team now, I think, in place with Pompeo and Ambassador Bolton, Peter Navarro, and Larry Kudlow.
Navarro, let's talk about Navarro and China, because this is key to the financial policy going forward. You said the United States is at war with China, and you support the administration's trade confrontation with China. Navarro,
I said economic war.
Economic war, but
they've been in economic war with us for 25 years. Look, one of the reasons Donald Trump's president of the United States is that when I stepped into the campaign, one of the things I told him was the studies by Pat Caddell that show for the first time in American history that working class people, middle class people believed America was in decline to the level of 70%. And they thought the elites were comfortable with that. We've had a group of elites, Republicans and Democrats, kind of this permanent political class runs the city that has been very comfortable with American decline.
I think a lot of Americans get it. I have friends in Cleveland, Ohio. A guy I talk about, a buddy of mine, Pat Carrilco, we used to work on old Studebakers together. He worked at a steel mill. I saw his job get shipped overseas. He's back at work as a Middle, an Indian-owned company, by the way, Middle Steel in Cleveland. But let me ask you about the China policy. Navarro, actually, in a speech last week, attacked Wall Street. He threatened Wall Street. Was he attacking Mnuchin? Because he said, stay out of these negotiations. What's going on here? Because Wall Street, there's trillions of dollars in potential trade that could be impacted by our confrontation with China.
Look, go back. Look at the White House has put out two white papers. Put a white paper out about what China's doing to suppress the U.S. economy. Okay, this was in June, about forced technology transfers in intellectual property. Not theft, but the forced technology transfers. Navarro's speech at CSIS was talk about our defense base and talked about there's so many aspects of our defense base that are really dependent upon China in the supply chain. What he's laying out as the case is that this is, as Mike Pence said, if you read his speech, this is a multi-department focus of the U.S. government finally on what China's been doing. China's had all forces of state confrontation with America. It's deeper than just trade. And I think what Navarro is saying, if you go back and look, and his was a talk, I don't think it was a speech. I think if you go back and look at the substance of it, he said, hey, this is just not about some trade deal. There's just not going to be some trade-off in soybeans that we're going to get a better trade-offs. There's non-tariff barriers. There's forced technology transfers. There's currency manipulation. There's many aspects of this, of which the president has been very articulate about the entire time. Here's the thing. China has been running the tables on us for 25 years, and what Navarro was highlighting, this kind of strategic economic dialogue that the Henry Kissingers and the Wall Street guys have said, oh, let's have it. They've been tapping us along.
Well, Hank Paulson was over in China just, 2 weeks ago and was supporting, I don't want to say the status quo, but was supporting the Wall Street line on this.
First thing, I worked for Hank Paulson. I was at Goldman Sachs. He's a terrific guy when I was a junior banker. Paulson made a very big, you're seeing even that element of the establishment. Paulson said first, many of the things that President Trump have brought up in this populist economic nationalist movement brought up is actually correct. We have depended upon China's kind of goodwill for too long. He says, you can't do words, we have to have actions. And then he made a statement I disagree with. He said, China is not an existential threat to the United States. I think if you look at, and this is not the Chinese people, I think the American people, I spent a lot of time in China. I actually lived in China for a little while. And when I was in the Pacific Fleet, we were all around China. It's the Chinese people, and I think the American people are very close. It is the Chinese Communist Party. You have a reckless totalitarian regime, and they've been particularly reckless. And I would talk to all the people at Yahoo Finance about their financial situation. And the elites in Wall Street have kind of gone along with this, right? And this is what I think Navarro was saying the other day. We don't need people coming in here and talking and pushing President Trump to try to do a trade deal when there's many more aspects of this that have to be rectified.
Walk me through, help us understand what the end game looks like and what success looks like. You said victory is when they give us full access to their markets. Are you talking complete unfettered trade? We don't give full access to our markets to everybody.
First, we have the lowest tariffs in the world, most open markets in the world. I think the Chinese, number one, stop the forced technology transfers, give our companies not just on the business side, but on the manufacturing and the intellectual property side full access. Also, you've got to start to unwind these state-owned industries, the SOEs. I mean, they continue to pour hundreds of billions of dollars into now the SOEs are going to be a geopolitical.
How do you get 82 million Chinese communists? That's the elite in China. Right. How do you get them to unwind the state-owned businesses? Their economy is built on that.
Well, look, this is talking about structural reform. That's my point, that this is an engagement. I didn't say this, and President Trump's not saying this is going to take an afternoon. This is a long-term plan of real engagement, but the engagement has to be at that level. She gave a speech yesterday. It's in this morning's Financial Times. Everybody should see. He starts off the speech by saying, hey, because of current developments, we can't get the technologies we want. We have to go back to self-reliance, which is a Mao Zedong term. And he said it at one of the most famous state-owned industries that was developed in 1954. And he says, we're only going to redouble our efforts as state-owned industries. And by the way, when they played this in China, they cut out the part about current developments because what it is that the Trump administration has gotten much tougher, helping our companies in Silicon Valley protect their intellectual property. And so now, and that's why, by the way, one thing to keep in mind, the entire NAFTA deal, President Trump's strategic vision of NAFTA, and that's why a populist socialist in Mexico, that president helped push it forward, was to create a geostrategic manufacturing base, to take the supply chain, take part of the supply chain back from East Asia and start to bring it back to the Western industrial democracies. That's why Japan's going to do a bilateral deal with us. That's why Korea, we're going to get an updated deal with them. And that's why the EU, that's why Juncker came over, and they're going to do a deal with us. This is shifting the supply chain, the high value-added manufacturing jobs back from East Asia to the United States and to the West.
Or perhaps to Vietnam and to India. I got to add.
Yes, by the way, part of it is that, but I also think when you look at risk, and I think when CEOs in capital markets start to look at this, that's why NAFTA was so important. That's why NAFTA had to be the first part, and that's why the part in Mexico about point of origin, so China could not game the system.
I just have to ask you, because I want to move on to something about economic nationalism, which is your agenda. With China,
yes,
we have the potential for a meeting at the end of this month, and then we have the real trade tariff war, whatever term you want to use, January. Does this get worse before it gets better? And you should know that the people we interview, we've interviewed farmers on Yahoo Finance, although they're being hurt by this, they still support the president. But my question is, will this get worse in January?
Here's what I think. I think the president takes he takes all aspects of this together. I don't think you're going to see President Trump just do some sort of trade deal. Right now, the Chinese look at us as a tributary state. It's one of the reasons. Think of what we ship to them. We ship beef and grain and natural resources, natural gas, soybeans, etc. Very little high value added manufacturing. Okay, that is the entire point of President Trump's what he's talking about. That's why NAFTA was so important. He says, no, a major power has to have a strong, robust, vibrant manufacturing base. And our technology sector needs to work around that manufacturing base. That's why I don't think there's any easy solution. I do not believe that President Trump, as much as Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, who I've known Stephen for a long time, he was at Goldman, as much as these guys trying to push, just focusing on the trade part, this is not a trade war. When it's written up as a trade war, it's wrong. It's an economic war that's been run on us.
Economic nationalism, the core of this philosophy is bringing manufacturing back to the United States.
Yes.
I just want to let you know, right now, manufacturing as part of the labor force is about 8.8%, 12.4 million jobs. According to the Federal Reserve, you had this peak in 1947, 34% of the labor force was tied to manufacturing. But labor, or at least manufacturing, has become incredibly more productive. And the decline in in manufacturing labor employment is, they would say, productivity, not the shipping of jobs overseas. And then just very simply, you look at 2012, the Obama administration, the manufacturing jobs that were coming back, not much different, although 2018 is better when seasonally adjusted. It's pretty much the same.
That's not true. Our manufacturing jobs are coming. Manufacturing jobs, 350,000 jobs were created, I think, in the third quarter.
No, that's a 12-month seasonally adjusted number. But the bottom line is it represents.
By the way, go ask your buddy, go ask your friend, the Studebaker guy in Cleveland, if they think that manufacturing jobs are coming back.
His job came back before the president, but it came back because an Indian steel magnate bought ISG, which had bought LTV out of bankruptcy. My point is, we keep hearing this resurgence of manufacturing, and manufacturing as a share of GDP and as a share of the labor force has essentially been the same for several years.
By the way, it's the central part of the tax cut. The tax cut was to make our companies competitive with Germany and China. His entire focus is bringing high value added manufacturing jobs back. And the cop-out that said, hey, it's all going to be robots, it's all going to be AI, that's why China had Made in China 2025. China had a strategic plan 10 years ago to say we're going to have a convergence of advanced chip design, of robotics, artificial intelligence, and maybe genetic engineering, but at least those three, and we will dominate the West. We will dominate manufacturing. You've seen now Xi's making the statement that we have to go back to self-reliance. Why? The West is now stopping the intellectual property theft, but more importantly, stopping the forced technology transfers. Under Donald Trump's, in the core of economic nationalism is we can't be a great nation and serve our citizens, particularly the working class, with service jobs. It just doesn't work. This is why tariffs are more than just about taxes. If you read J.D. Vance and Hillbilly Elegies, which is the finest sociological study of the Trump base, what J.D. says all the time, he cites these studies, I think from MIT and Harvard, that says there's a direct correlation between the factories that left for China
and opioid addiction,
the jobs that with them, and opioid addiction. This is about dignity and self-worth of our working base. And that's why they look to President Trump. President Trump is finally going to fight. And that's why the Wall Street guys saying, hey, just focus on this, on the trade deal, on the tariffs. It's not about the tariffs. It's broader.
I think having manufacturing in factories that are high-tech and perhaps robotic is not going to put people who I care dearly about in Cleveland, Ohio, back on a factory line. That's what the issue of productivity is about. And this resurgence of manufacturing jobs that is the core of your philosophy, it's not going to be there to put those people, hillbilly elegy, on factory line jobs.
By the way, as your previous speaker said, through job training, getting people's skills up, the working class in our country is still some of the most productive people in the world. Hispanic, black, white working class, lower middle class, those people can be retrained and they will do those jobs in manufacturing. We just can't sit there and say, hey, because they have some sort of technology component to it, that our people can't be trained. That's just not true. And by the way, who fights for those workers? That's what I keep saying.
Donald Trump is fighting. I would give you that.
Economic nationalism doesn't care about your race, your ethnicity, your religion, your gender, your sexual preference. What it cares about is that you're a citizen of the United States States of America. And it's that working class that we have abused. We've abused them by an open borders immigration policy that lets them compete with illegal immigration labor. And then because of bad trade deals, we're having them unfairly compete with foreign labor. The protection of those workers, and yes, I am a protectionist, the protections of those workers in the lower middle class is what we have to do, make sure that that is vibrant and robust. And if we do that, we're going to have a civic society of which we can have capital markets that are the most robust capital markets in the world.
So let me ask you this. I've got to wrap up.
Yep.
But why are you aligning? You want to create a labor party. Why are you aligning with Republicans who you're at war with, the establishment, when you should be aligned, and you've talked about this with Bernie Sanders and even maybe Maria Svart over at the Democratic Socialists. Wouldn't you be more in league with them?
No, because here's the difference. The future is populism. Okay, the question before us
is... you
don't
care if it's right-wing or left-wing.
No, I do. Look, there's a fundamental difference between populist nationalism and populist socialism. Okay, what Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders and Ms. Cortez and these other folks argue is more state intervention into our lives and into the economy. Remember, right-wing populism, I said at CPAC, it's economic nationalism, it's America First national security, and it's deconstruction of the administrative state. One of the reasons that Trump's got this kind of animal spirits unleashed again is not just deregulation, but trying to take the Leviathan in this city that all of you know what runs this town, and try to take it apart brick by brick. The fundamental difference in what right-wing populism and left-wing populism is state intervention. What I say is we're in a system now of state-controlled capitalism. You've had a tremendous consolidation in media companies, in tech companies, in pharmaceutical companies, in manufacturing. So now you have a handful of Goliaths, right, in bed with big government. That's what has to be breaking up. The whole purpose of economic nationalism is to give the little guy a piece of the action through better high-value-added jobs and wages, but also to start to break up and have entrepreneurial finance.
If you're America First,
yes.
Why are you so concentrated with the movement in Europe? And why are you trying to change and upset the election for the EU Parliament? I'm not saying it's right or wrong.
No, because it's in the best interest of America. Strong nations make great neighbors. What you have in the world today is this kind of, you have a global populist outbreak, okay? A nationalism, this kind of thing. It's really sovereignty of the states, but it's all based upon the citizen. So a lot of people have come to me. You have this major election next year in the European Parliament. You're going to have all these populist parties and really these sovereigntist parties, these nationalist parties, I think, going to really represent. I'm there because for 9 years I've been working on it here to develop the tools, the polling, the messaging, how you think about it. They can all run their own individual parties, their own individual countries run their elections. I'm there as kind of a backup to say, hey, here's some tools, here's some things you might want to think about of how you kind of, drive voters out to the polls, to get out to vote. But after this November 6th, I think I got to learn some lessons from the left. And one thing I want to say, I think this election on November 6th was great. People talk about the country being divided. The country's divided because we have two different philosophies of how we ought to go forward. This has happened in America before. The best way to do it is at the ballot box. And what I admire, I disagree 100% with their ideology, but I like the hustle, the grit, and determination of the progressive left, because quite frankly, I think this was won on the ground, and it was won by small donors. And I think the left showed us, and I keep telling people, we've got to redouble our efforts. If we want to win in 2020, we've got to go.
I have 10 seconds. Democrats running in 2020. Just give me the names real quick.
Here's
10 seconds.
44 people. Oh,
Kamala
definitely.
Harris?
100%. All of them.
Cory Booker?
Yes.
And
you got 44
Joe Biden?
people. Here's the thing. They're going to force Trump to the right. The left's going to pick a left-type candidate like Cory Booker or Kamala Harris, something like that. And Michael Bloomberg is setting up an apparatus today to look for a Mitt Romney type or something like that to have a middle party. They're going to look at this election as the election of 1860. We're going to have two sides on the right. They're going to do the math and think, hey, we have
to wrap it there. But Cory Booker's going to be a guest a little bit later on. Steve
definitely.
Bannon, I wish I had 20 more minutes with you, but thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.